The building lobby doors closed behind Ji-won at exactly 2:47 a.m. She knew because she'd been watching the clock for the past 3 hours, watching each minute crawl past while her boss revised the same presentation slide for the 11th time. Her feet ached in heels she'd been wearing for 19 hours. Her eyes burned from staring at screens. All she wanted was her apartment, her bed, and 8 hours of unconsciousness before doing this all over again. The Gangnam streets were still alive despite the hour, neon bleeding across wet pavement, convenience stores glowing like small suns, the occasional taxi cruising past with its red light on. Ji-won pulled out her phone and opened Kakao Taxi. 3 drivers nearby. She selected the closest one, Kim Sang-ho, 4.9 rating, 23 years experience. Profile photo showed a middle-aged man with kind eyes and gray at his temples. The app confirmed, 2 minutes away. She waited under the building's awning, watching the blue dot on her screen approach. A silver sedan pulled up, license plate matching perfectly. The rear door unlocked with a soft click. "Mapogu?" the driver asked as she slid in, his voice polite and grandfatherly. "Yes, near Hongdae Station." She gave him the exact address, settling into the seat and immediately pulling out her phone. 47 unread emails. Her mother's missed calls. She ignored all of it and opened the navigation to track their route home. The driver pulled into traffic without another word. Ji-won didn't mind. She preferred quiet drivers, the ones who understood that passengers at this hour just wanted silence and space. She watched the GPS route draw itself across her screen, a clean blue line from Gangnam to Mapogu, 23 minutes estimated. Then the line redrew. She blinked. The route had changed, looping slightly east before heading north. Probably traffic, she thought, the app adjusting for construction or an accident. She looked up briefly. They were moving smoothly through nearly empty streets, no traffic, no construction. She looked back down. The route was redrawing again, a different path now, more circular. Ji-won frowned but said nothing. Drivers knew shortcuts the apps didn't. She'd learned that in 5 years of Seoul late nights. She checked the time, 2:52 a.m., 5 minutes since she'd gotten in. That felt right. Outside the window, the city slid past. She recognized the route vaguely. They were heading toward the Han River. Toward Dongjak Bridge, probably, the main crossing from Gangnam North. Made sense. She answered an email, deleted 3 more, looked up. They were on Dongjak Bridge. The river stretched dark beneath them, the city lights reflecting on black water. The bridge's distinctive arches passed overhead, one after another in rhythmic intervals. She counted them absently. 4, 5, 6. She looked back at her phone, still 2:52 a.m. The clock hadn't changed. That was wrong. She'd been looking at emails for at least 3 minutes. It should be 2:55 by now, maybe 2:56. She checked the signal bars. Full. 4 bars of LTE. Everything normal, just the clock frozen. Phone glitch. Happens sometimes. She'd restart it when she got home. Ji-won looked up again. They were on Dongjak Bridge. Not still on it again. From the beginning, the entrance she'd watched them pass 5 minutes ago, the same distinctive arch, the same angle of approach. Her stomach dropped. She stared out the window, counting the overhead arches again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. They crossed completely. She watched the north side approach, watched them drive off the bridge onto solid ground. She looked at her phone's GPS. The blue dot showed them on the bridge, still, even though they'd just driven off it. She looked up through the windshield. The bridge entrance was ahead of them, again. For the first time since getting in, Ji-won looked in the rearview mirror. The driver's eyes were already looking back at her, dark, unblinking, fixed on her reflection with an intensity that made her breath catch. How long had he been staring? She watched his eyes in the mirror. 5 seconds passed, 10, 15. He didn't blink, not once. His gaze never wavered from hers, even though his hands were steady on the wheel, even though he was supposedly watching the road. Ji-won's hand moved slowly to the door handle. She pulled. Nothing. The lock stayed down. The door didn't budge. On her phone screen, still frozen at 2:52 a.m., the GPS showed their position. Dongjak Bridge. Crossing. Again. In the rearview mirror, the driver's eyes hadn't left hers. Outside, Seoul's neon lights blurred past in an endless, repeating loop. Ji-won had been at her desk for 14 hours when her boss finally approved Slide 32. By then, it was past midnight, and the last subway had departed Gangnam Station at 12:30 a.m., with her name not on the passenger list. She'd watched the clock tick past the deadline while Mr. Park circled the same revenue projection graph with his red pen, asking her to make the numbers pop more. The office hotel was 2 floors down. Clean sheets, a shower, everything she needed to collapse until morning. But Ji-won had chosen home instead, chosen her own bed and her own space, and the illusion of work-life separation that she clung to even when the separation had long since dissolved. It was a choice she'd made hundreds of times in her 5 years climbing the corporate ladder at the marketing firm. Tonight, it would be the choice that changed everything. Seoul at 2:47 a.m. was a city that never quite slept. Gangnam District pulsed with residual energy, convenience stores bright as daylight, late-night restaurants still serving, the occasional Mercedes purring past with tinted windows. It was a place where safety came from infrastructure, from CCTV cameras on every corner, from the tracking apps and verified services, and the digital paper trail that followed every transaction. Ji-won felt safe here. Women walked alone at this hour without fear. The city protected its people with technology and surveillance and the simple statistical reality that Seoul was one of the safest metropolises on Earth. Taxi culture reflected that safety. Legitimate companies, registered drivers, every ride logged and tracked through apps that shared your location, your driver's information, your route, your estimated arrival time. The system was designed for accountability, for trust. Kim Sang-ho's profile had loaded on her screen with reassuring details. 54 years old, 23 years of driving experience, rating of 4.9 stars across 8,247 trips. His photo showed a man who could have been anyone's grandfather. Weathered face, tired eyes, the ghost of a smile that suggested patience earned through decades of navigating difficult traffic and difficult passengers. When she'd slid into the back seat, his first words had been gentle. "Long night at the office?" "Very long," Ji-won had replied, grateful for the acknowledgement, for the simple human recognition that someone had noticed her exhaustion. "You work too hard," he'd said, pulling into traffic with the smooth competence of someone who'd driven these streets for decades. "Young people these days, always at the office. My daughter's the same. I tell her money isn't everything." Ji-won had smiled by herself. "Your daughter is lucky to have you worrying about her." "Maybe. She doesn't listen." He'd glanced at her in the rearview mirror. Brief, normal, the kind of look drivers make to gauge their passengers. But I keep saying it anyway. They talked about the weather then, the late autumn cold settling over Seoul, the forecast calling for rain later in the week. Normal taxi conversation, the kind that filled the space without demanding too much attention. Ji-won had felt herself relaxing, the tension of 14 hours at a desk beginning to unknot from her shoulders. She'd pulled out her phone and started answering emails. Work followed her everywhere, but at least in a taxi she could pretend she was making progress toward home while still being productive. Her boss would see the timestamps, 2:49 a.m., 2:51 a.m., and know she was committed, know she was the kind of employee who never really stopped working. The GPS route on her screen had looked slightly odd when she'd first glanced at it. Not the direct path she'd expected, but a longer loop that curved east before heading north. She assumed traffic, though the streets seemed clear. Maybe construction she didn't know about. Maybe a shortcut the app hadn't learned yet. Drivers knew things apps didn't. They had decades of experience, mental maps built from thousands of trips. If Kim Sang-ho thought this route was faster, she had no reason to question it. Ji-won had looked back down at her email and kept typing. Outside, Seoul's familiar landmarks had started to slide past in their endless neon glow.
Inside, her fingers had moved across the screen, responding to messages that couldn't wait until morning, building the meticulous professional reputation that had carried her this far. She hadn't noticed when they'd first approached Dongjak Bridge. She hadn't noticed the driver's eyes shift to the rearview mirror and stay there. She hadn't noticed the exact moment her phone's clock had stopped moving forward. By the time she'd looked up and seen the bridge for the second time, it was already too late to question whether getting into this taxi had been her choice at all.
Dongjak Bridge stretched 2.3 kilometers across the Han River. Jiwon had crossed it hundreds of times. At this hour, with no traffic, it took 3 minutes. 4 at most. They'd been on it for at least 6. She looked up from her phone, awareness prickling at the back of her neck. The bridge's distinctive overhead arches continued to pass in steady rhythm, their lights casting shadows that swept across the taxi's interior in regular intervals. One after another. Too many. She'd counted 12 already. The bridge only had 8. Jiwon glanced at her phone's GPS. The blue line showing their route had changed again. Completely. It no longer showed a path to Mapo-gu at all. Instead, it displayed a tangled mess of overlapping routes, circling back on themselves, creating patterns that made no geographic sense. "Excuse me," she said, keeping her voice polite, professional. "Is this the right way?" "Faster route." The driver's voice was flat, mechanical. "Trust me." The phrase sat wrong in her chest. Too simple, too dismissive. But she was tired, probably overthinking. Drivers dealt with backseat navigation all the time. Of course he'd be annoyed. She looked at the time display. 2:52 a.m. She'd checked it 3 minutes ago. It had been 2:52 then, too. Phone glitch. Had to be. She pressed the power button, held it down to restart. The screen went black, then lit up again with the Apple logo. The reboot sequence began. Outside the window, she caught sight of a familiar landmark, the GS25 convenience store on the river's north bank, the one with the bright Pepsi advertisement in the window. She'd noticed it when they'd first approached the bridge, the distinctive blue and red sign with the cartoon bottles. They drove past it. 30 seconds later, they drove past it again. Same store, same Pepsi sign, same exact angle of approach. Jiwon's breath caught. She pressed her face closer to the window. No, she was tired. She hadn't been paying attention. There were probably multiple GS25 stores along this route. The Pepsi promotion was everywhere. But the advertisement had the same crease in the upper right corner, the same positioning, identical. Her phone finished rebooting. The screen lit up. 2:52 a.m. They were crossing the bridge. She could feel the slight change in road texture, the rhythm of expansion joints beneath the tires, the arches overhead, the dark river below. Then it ended. They drove off the bridge onto solid ground. Jiwon exhaled without realizing she'd been holding her breath. See? Normal. Just tired. Just paranoid. She looked down at her email, trying to focus. 5 minutes passed. Or what felt like 5 minutes. Her phone still said 2:52 a.m., but she could feel time moving in her body, in the heaviness of her eyelids, in the way her neck had started to ache from looking down. She looked up. The entrance to Dongjak Bridge was directly ahead of them. Not a different bridge, the same bridge. She recognized the specific configuration of approach lanes, the particular angle of the first overhead arch, the faded lane markings she'd unconsciously memorized from hundreds of crossings. They were approaching the same bridge they'd just crossed. "Sir," she said, and her voice came out higher than intended. "Sir, I think we're going in circles." The driver said nothing. His hands remained steady on the wheel. The taxi maintained its speed, moving mechanically with precision. "Sir, please." In the rearview mirror, his eyes met hers. They hadn't blinked. She watched for 10 seconds, counting heartbeats. His eyes stayed locked on her reflection, unmoving, unblinking, while his hands expertly guided the vehicle through traffic that wasn't there. The bridge entrance swallowed them again. The first overhead arch passed, then the second, the third. Jiwon's hand found the door handle and pulled. The lock stayed down.
She pulled harder. Nothing. Her finger jabbed the window button. The glass didn't move. Outside, the GS-25 with the creased Pepsi sign appeared on the right. They passed it. And 3 minutes later, when they crossed the bridge for the 4th time, they passed it again.
Ji-won pulled the door handle again, this time without pretense of casualness. The lock stayed down. The handle moved, but nothing caught, nothing released. It was like pulling a lever disconnected from any mechanism. She tried the other door. Same result. The lock button itself was unresponsive, a piece of plastic that might as well have been decorative. "Sir," she said, fighting to keep her voice level. "Sir, can you unlock the doors?" The driver didn't respond. His eyes remained fixed on her in the rearview mirror, that unwavering stare that never shifted to the road, never blinked, never acknowledged that she'd spoken. Ji-won pressed the window button. Nothing. She pressed it again, holding it down. The glass didn't budge, not even a whisper of motor sound, no mechanical resistance, just dead silence. Her hands were shaking now. She pulled out her phone, unlocked it with a fumbling thumb. The screen showed 2:52 a.m., still frozen, but that didn't matter. She could still call. She opened the phone app. No signal. 0 bars. Not even one. Just the words, "No service," where the carrier name should be. Ji-won stared at the screen. That was impossible. They were in Seoul's city center, surrounded by cell towers, by infrastructure designed to ensure constant connectivity. She'd had 4 bars of LTE 3 minutes ago, 5 minutes ago, however long ago before time had stopped making sense. She checked the Wi-Fi. Searching. No networks found. In central Seoul, where Wi-Fi signals overlapped from every building, every business, every apartment, nothing. She opened the Kakao taxi app with trembling fingers, found the emergency button, the one that was supposed to alert police, share your location, send an SOS to emergency contacts. She pressed it. The loading circle spun and spun and spun. Error. Connection failed. Ji-won's breath came faster. She was completely cut off. Every safety feature, every modern protection, every digital lifeline had failed simultaneously. The taxi had become a sealed box, moving through space with no connection to the outside world. "Sir!" Her voice was sharper now, fear bleeding through the professional courtesy. "Sir, I need you to pull over. Now!" The driver's mouth moved. His voice came without his lips matching the words, like audio overlaid on the wrong footage. "I can't." "What do you mean you can't?" Ji-won's hands gripped her phone so hard her knuckles went white. "Just stop the car. Pull over. Let me out." "I can't," he repeated, and this time something in his tone made her stomach drop. Not threat, not malice. Resignation. "I'm sorry," the driver said, and his eyes in the mirror held something that might have been tears if the light hit them differently. "I didn't choose this." "Choose what? What are you talking about?" The taxi crossed the bridge again. The 5th time? 6th? Ji-won had lost count. "Neither did you," he said. His hands on the steering wheel were white-knuckled, she noticed for the first time, gripping with desperate force. Not the relaxed hold of someone in control, but the grip of someone holding on for dear life. Or someone trying to force the wheel to turn and failing. Ji-won looked at his reflection more carefully. His jaw was clenched. Tendons stood out in his neck. His eyes weren't just watching her. They were pleading. He wasn't driving the taxi. The taxi was driving itself, and he was just as trapped as she was. "How long?" Ji-won whispered. The driver's reflection showed something that might have been a smile, or might have been a grimace. "For me," his voice cracked, 3 years. I've been crossing this bridge for 3 years. Outside the window, the GS-25 with the creased Pepsi sign appeared again on the right. Ji-won's phone screen still showed 2:52 a.m.
Time wasn't frozen, she realized with sudden horrible clarity. They were. Ji-won looked down at the seat beneath her, needing to focus on something other than the driver's impossible claim. 3 years. The fabric under her hands felt wrong, rougher than it should be, stiff in patches. She shifted slightly, and something dark caught the passing streetlight. Stains. Multiple stains, overlapping each other in layers. Some faded to brown, others darker, more recent. The pattern spread across the seat in a constellation of evidence that her mind initially refused to process. Ji-won touched one with a trembling finger. The fabric was crusty, dried, but when she pressed harder, she felt the layers beneath. Old, very old. And beneath that, older still. Her breath stopped. Blood. Not one stain, dozens, maybe more. Different sizes, different patterns suggesting different positions, different people. Some small, like someone had pressed an injured hand to the seat. Others large, spreading, the kind that came from wounds that wouldn't stop bleeding. Many passengers had sat exactly where she sat now. Many had bled here. Ji-won's eyes snapped up to the rearview mirror, to the driver's unblinking stare, and terror flooded through her with physical force. "What did you do to them?" Her voice came out raw, barely recognizable. "What did you do to all of them?" The driver's reflection shifted. His eyes, those unwavering, unblinking eyes, were wet. Tears tracked down his face in the mirror, though his expression didn't change, though his face remained frozen in that terrible, watching stillness. "Nothing," he said, and his voice broke on the word. "I did nothing. I'm a prisoner, too." Ji-won looked at his hands on the steering wheel, really looked. They were clenched so tightly the knuckles had gone bone white, bloodless. The tendons in his forearms stood out like cables under strain. His entire body was rigid with effort. He wasn't guiding the taxi. He was trying to force it to turn, to stop, to do anything other than what it was doing, and failing completely. The vehicle moved with smooth, mechanical precision, following a route that had nothing to do with the man behind the wheel. He was just another passenger, just another prisoner in a vehicle that had stopped obeying human control 3 years ago. "The blood," Ji-won whispered. "If you didn't hurt them, then what?" Movement outside her window cut her off. Another taxi, pulling alongside them in the left lane. Silver, just like this one, moving at exactly the same speed. Ji-won's eyes locked onto the back seat. A woman sat there, young, professional, wearing a white coat. Her face was pressed against the glass, both hands flat against the glass. Her mouth was moving, forming a single word, over and over. "Help. Help. Help." Their eyes met through 2 layers of glass and whatever impossible space separated them. The woman's expression was pure terror, recognition, desperate pleading. She'd been there before. She knew what was happening. She knew what came next. Ji-won reached for her own window, forgetting it wouldn't open, her hands slapping uselessly against the glass. The other woman mouthed the word one more time. "Help." Then the taxi accelerated impossibly fast and was gone, disappearing ahead of them into the neon-lit darkness. Ji-won spun to look through the rear window. Nothing. The road behind them was empty, as if the other taxi had never existed. But it had. She'd seen her. "How many?" Ji-won asked, her voice hollow. "How many others are out here?" The driver's tears continued to fall in the mirror. "I don't know," he said. "I see them sometimes. Different faces, different years, all trapped, all crossing the same bridge." Ji-won looked down at the bloodstains beneath her, at the evidence of passengers who had sat in this exact spot, trapped in this exact moment, bleeding from injuries she couldn't see yet. The blood, Ji-won said again. If nothing hurt them, why is there blood? The driver's voice was barely a whisper. Because some of them tried to get out anyway. The bridge entrance appeared ahead of them again. Ji-won's hands curled into fists. She understood now. The blood wasn't from the beginning of the ride. It was from the end, when passengers stopped believing there was any other way out.
Ji-won stared at her phone. 2:52 a.m. The seconds didn't tick forward. The numbers stayed frozen, like a photograph of time, rather than time itself. She looked at the taxi's dashboard. The digital clock there was spinning backwards. 2:52, 2:51, 2:50, 2:49, then forward again, then backwards, the numbers cycling through sequences that made no mathematical sense. Time eating itself. Her wrist felt heavy. She looked down at her watch, the analog one her father had given her for her university graduation. The second hand was rotating impossibly fast, completing full circuits and heartbeats. The minute hand chased it, both spinning like they were trying to catch up to something they'd lost or escape something chasing them. They'd been driving for what felt like 40 minutes, maybe longer. Ji-won's body knew it, even if the clocks denied it. Her neck ached from tension. Her bladder was full. Her mouth had gone dry. Physical time, biological time, continuing while digital time fractured and looped and lied. The taxis should have run out of gas by now. She'd seen the gauge when she first got in, half full, maybe less. 40 minutes of driving, of circling, of crossing the same bridge over and over. The needle should have dropped, should be warning them about empty. Instead, it stayed exactly where it had been, half full, fixed. Another thing frozen while they kept moving. It should be morning by now, or close to it. The sky should be lightening with that pre-dawn gray that came before sunrise. But outside the windows, Seoul remained locked in deep night. The same darkness, the same quality of 3 a.m. emptiness. Still 2:52. Always 2:52. The GS25 convenience store appeared on the right for the 6th time, or 7th. Ji-won had stopped counting. The same creased Pepsi advertisement in the window, the same bright fluorescent interior, the same clerk standing behind the counter, not moving. Ji-won pressed her face against the window as they passed. The clerk was frozen mid-motion, one hand reaching for something on the shelf behind him, his face turned slightly toward the door. But he wasn't breathing, wasn't blinking, wasn't existing in any active sense. Like someone had paused a video. "The city," Ji-won whispered. "Why isn't anyone moving?" "It's the bridge," the driver said. His voice had gone flat, reciting facts he'd learned through repetition. "It does this. Dongjak Bridge at 2:47 a.m. Something about that moment, that specific time. It catches things." They passed another frozen scene, a couple arguing on the sidewalk, their mouths open mid-shout, hands raised in gestures that would never complete. A dog mid-leap after a ball that hung suspended in the air 3 feet from its nose. A motorcycle tipped at an angle that should have resulted in a crash, but the rider stayed balanced in that impossible instant forever. The whole city was paused. Only the taxi moved. Only they remained unstuck in the terrible amber of 2:52 a.m. "How long?" Ji-won asked, though she already knew the answer would destroy her. The driver's eyes in the mirror held the hollow emptiness of someone who had stopped counting time in any meaningful way. "For me, 3 years," his voice cracked. "I picked up a passenger at 2:47 a.m. 3 years ago.
Normal fare, normal route. We hit the bridge and it started. The loop. I've been driving this route for 3 years. The same 30 minutes, over and over. I don't age, I don't sleep, I don't stop. 3 years, Jiwon repeated numbly. The passengers change. Someone new gets in every few cycles. I don't know how, I don't know why. They just appear in the back seat, and then they're here, trapped like me. The blood, Jiwon said. Some of them lasted days, weeks, months. His voice was hollow. Eventually, they couldn't take it anymore. The loop, the same 30 minutes forever. They tried to get out their own way. Jiwon looked down at the stains beneath her. Different sizes, different desperations. "How many?" she whispered. I stopped counting after 40. The bridge entrance appeared ahead again. Her phone still said 2:52 a.m. Outside, Seoul stayed frozen in a moment that had stopped being a moment and become a cage. And somewhere ahead, in another loop, another iteration, another version of this same eternal 30 minutes, a woman in a white coat was still mouthing the word help through glass that would never break. The tunnel entrance appeared without warning, a mouth of concrete and tile that shouldn't have been on this route at all. Jiwon had crossed Dongjak Bridge hundreds of times. There was no tunnel, but the taxi entered it anyway. The tunnel should have been 200 meters, 300 at most. Seoul's river tunnels were short, efficient, designed to move traffic quickly beneath or around obstacles. They'd been driving through this one for 5 minutes. The overhead lights flickered in rhythmic patterns, on, off, casting strobing shadows that made Jiwon's eyes ache. Emergency lighting along the walls pulsed amber, then white, then amber again. The tiles on the walls repeated in sequences that her brain tried to parse and failed. The same pattern of cracks, the same water stain, the same maintenance panel, over and over. Not similar, identical. Like the tunnel was copying itself, extending infinitely by duplicating the same 200-meter section again and again. Jiwon pressed her hands against the window, looking for the end, for any sign of exit. Just more tunnel, more flickering lights, more impossible repetition. Then finally, an opening appeared ahead. Dim light, city glow. They emerged. Seoul spread before them, but not Seoul. The buildings were the same shape. Jiwon recognized the distinctive silhouette of the 63 building, the angular geometry of the COEX towers, the residential high-rises of Gangnam. Same structures, but the colors were wrong. The 63 building glowed deep purple instead of gold. The COEX towers pulsed with a light that shifted between colors that didn't have names, hues her eyes registered but her brain couldn't process. The neon signs were worse. They blazed from every storefront, every building, but the characters weren't Korean, weren't English, weren't any language she'd ever seen. Symbols that writhed and changed as she looked at them, refusing to stay still long enough to be read. The sky above was purple-black, but not the purple-black of normal night. This was something else, something that hurt to look at directly, like the color of a bruise, of something wounded and wrong. Other cars moved on the roads. Jiwon leaned forward, desperate to see other people, other lives, proof they weren't alone. All taxis. Silver taxis, just like theirs, dozens of them, circling the same intersections, crossing the same bridges, moving in patterns that repeated and overlapped like orbits around an invisible center. All trapped. "This is where we are now," the driver said quietly. Between. Between what? Jiwon's voice came out as a whisper. Between when you got in and when you were supposed to get out. He gestured at the impossible city outside. Between 2:47 and 3:17. 30 minutes that never finished, the moment that got stuck. Jiwon watched one of the other taxis drive straight up the side of a building, not crashing, just driving, perpendicular to the ground as if gravity had become a suggestion rather than a law. Another taxi drove through an intersection, passed through a bus without collision, both vehicles occupying the same space for 3 impossible seconds. Physics doesn't work here. Time doesn't work here. We're in the gap, the space between moments, the place where things go when they fall through the cracks of reality. A taxi passed overhead, driving on nothing, its wheels turning against empty air. "How many?" Jiwon asked, watching the circling vehicles. "How many are trapped here?" "I don't know. More every time. The gap is getting bigger. More passengers, more drivers, more people who got into taxis at 2:47 a.m. and never got out." The purple-black sky pulsed like something living. The buildings shifted slightly, their geometry refusing to stay consistent. A street that had been straight 5 seconds ago now curved impossibly, forming an Escher-like loop that fed back into itself. "We're not in Seoul anymore," Jiwon said. Yes and no. The driver's reflection looked tired beyond measure. "We're in the Seoul that exists in the moment between moments, the city that only exists in the gap. We're everywhere and nowhere. 2:52 a.m. forever, but 2:52 that never becomes 2:53. Through the window, Jiwon saw a woman's face pressed against the glass of a passing taxi. The same woman in the white coat, or a different woman who looked identical, or the same woman in a different loop, a different iteration, forever circling, forever trapped. The woman's mouth formed the same word: help. Then she was gone. And the taxi kept driving through the Seoul that wasn't Seoul, through the impossible city built from a moment that refused to end, through the gap between getting in and getting out. Forever crossing, never arriving. Always 2:52 a.m.
The dashboard clock spasmed. The numbers that had been spinning, cycling, frozen, suddenly jumped. 3:17 a.m. The taxi screeched to a halt so violently Jiwon was thrown forward against her seatbelt. The tires screamed against pavement. Real pavement. The sound echoing in a way it hadn't for the past... how long? 30 minutes? Hours? 3 years compressed into half an hour? Jiwon looked up. They were on Dongjak Bridge. Normal Dongjak Bridge. The sky was the right color, deep night black, not purple bruised wrong. The buildings of Seoul glowed with familiar neon, Korean characters she could read, colors that made sense. The Han River flowed dark and real beneath them. The driver turned around, fully around, for the first time since she'd entered the taxi. His face was wet with tears, carved with lines that might have been age or might have been 3 years of the same 30 minutes slowly destroying him from the inside. "You have to go," he said, his voice cracking with desperate urgency. "Now, before it loops again." "What? Now?" The force of it made Jiwon flinch. Some passengers don't get out. They stay forever. You have seconds. Go. The door unlocked with a click that sounded impossibly loud in the sudden stillness. Jiwon scrambled for the handle, her hands shaking so badly she could barely grip it. The door swung open, cold air rushed in, real air with the smell of the river and the city and normal March night. She practically fell out of the taxi, her legs barely supporting her weight after sitting frozen for an eternity. She hit the bridge pavement on her hands and knees, the concrete solid and real and painful against her palms. Her lungs filled with air that didn't taste like recycled terror. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Behind her, the taxi's engine revved. Jiwon spun around on her knees, suddenly desperate to see the license plate, to have proof, to remember something concrete about the vehicle that had held her prisoner in a moment that refused to end. The taxi was already pulling away. Through the rear window, backlit by the interior light, Jiwon saw a figure in the back seat. A woman, white coat,
dark hair, hands pressed against the glass, face frozen in an expression of absolute terror. The same woman from the other taxi, the one who'd mouthed help through 2 layers of glass, the same woman from the missing persons poster Ji-won had seen last week on the subway platform, disappeared without a trace 7 days ago after leaving work late in Gangnam. Park Soo-jin, 31 years old, last seen getting into a taxi. Their eyes met for one impossible second. Then the taxi accelerated, taillights disappearing into the sparse traffic of early morning Seoul. Ji-won screamed. The sound tore from her throat, raw and useless, swallowed by the night and the river and the indifferent city that had no idea what existed in the spaces between its moments. The bridge was empty. Just her, on her knees, shaking. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. The vibration felt like a gunshot. Ji-won pulled it out with trembling hands. 3:17 a.m. The correct time. Moving forward, she watched the seconds tick. 3:17:43, 3:17:44, 3:17:45. Full signal. 4 bars of LTE. 47 missed calls, all from her mother. Text messages flooding in now that service had returned. "Where are you? Call me. I'm worried. Ji-won, please. It's been an hour. I'm calling police." An hour? Ji-won looked at her call log. The last call her mother had made was at 2:46 a.m., before Ji-won got in the taxi. It was now 3:17 a.m. 30 minutes had passed in the real world. But she'd been in that taxi for eternities. She tried to stand. Her legs wouldn't cooperate. She stayed on her knees on the bridge, on the solid concrete of real Seoul, watching the taillights of the taxi disappear into the distance, taking Park Soo-jin into her own eternal 30 minutes, taking another passenger into 2:52 a.m., into the gap that never closed, into the ride that never ended. Behind Yuan, far in the distance, she heard a siren, emergency vehicles, normal city sounds, real world continuing. But all she could see was that face in the rear window. All she could hear was the driver's voice, "Some passengers don't get out. They stay forever." And the clock on her phone ticked forward. 3:17 a.m., 3:18 a.m., 3:19 a.m. Time moving again. For her. 3 years later, Min Ji-won stood on Dongjak Bridge at 2:45 a.m. with a film crew and equipment worth more than her first year's salary. Her YouTube series, Seoul's Unexplained, had amassed 847,000 subscribers, people hungry for answers to questions the authorities refused to ask. She'd found 23 other survivors willing to talk. 23 people who'd experienced the same impossible 30 minutes. They met monthly in a coffee shop in Hongdae, a support group for people who'd survived something that officially didn't exist. Every story was identical. 2:47 a.m. pickup, Dongjak Bridge, the loop, the frozen time, the city that wasn't their city. Release at exactly 3:17 a.m. Ji-won had documented 47 cases spanning 14 years. Patterns emerging from police reports filed and dismissed, missing persons cases closed without resolution, Reddit posts deleted by moderators who thought they were fiction. The Seoul Metropolitan Police maintained official skepticism, but Detective Park Min-suk, who'd taken her statement 3 years ago, sent her files quietly. Copies of reports that never made it to public record, evidence photographs labeled unexplained and filed away. Kim Sung-ho had been found 3 days after Ji-won's ride, alive, confused. He claimed he'd picked up a passenger at 2:47 a.m. who had never gotten out. His last clear memory ended there. The next thing he knew, he was waking up in his taxi, parked on a side street in Mapo-gu, 3 days gone from his life like someone had cut them out with scissors. The taxi had been analyzed. The blood evidence was real, dozens of different DNA profiles. But the patterns, forensics said, were impossible. Blood doesn't arrange itself in geometric formations. Blood doesn't layer in ways that suggest multiple injuries in the same location, occurring simultaneously in different time frames. Something about that bridge, that time, that 30-minute window between 2:47 and 3:17. 3 more cases this year alone. If it happens to you, Jiwon said to the camera, her voice steady with the authority of someone who'd survived and researched and refused to let the impossible remain unexamined. Remember, it ends at 3:17. Hold on until 3:17. Don't try to force your way out. The blood you saw, that's from the ones who panicked. Stay calm. Wait. You will be released. The film crew packed up at 3:20 a.m., relieved. Another night documenting the phenomenon without becoming part of it. Jiwon ordered a taxi through Kakao Taxi. Different company this time. Always different companies. Always verified drivers, always checking ratings, reviews, years of experience. The taxi arrived. She checked the license plate against her phone. Matched perfectly. She got in. Long night? The driver asked pleasantly. Middle-aged, tired eyes, grandfather's smile. Documentary filming, Ji-won said, settling into the seat. About urban legends. Ah, interesting work. They made casual conversation. The weather, the late hour. He asked about her filming. Was it scary, chasing ghosts? She laughed, said sometimes the real world was scarier than any ghost. They approached Dongjak Bridge. Ji-won glanced at her phone out of habit. 2:50 a.m. Her GPS flickered. The blue line showing their route redrew itself, then redrew again. Ice flooded Ji-won's veins. She looked up at the rearview mirror. The driver's eyes were already watching her. They hadn't blinked. No, Ji-won whispered. Her hand shot to the door handle. Locked. No, no, no. In the mirror, the driver's reflection showed tears beginning to form. "Sir," she once said, her voice cracking, "Sir, can you unlock the doors?" The driver's mouth moved. His voice came with that same disconnected quality, like audio from somewhere else. "I'm sorry. I didn't choose this." The bridge entrance appeared ahead. Neither did you. Ji-won's scream was cut off as the screen went black. Silence. Then, in the darkness, text appeared. Min Ji-won was last seen on March 15th, 2024, entering a taxi near Dongjak Bridge at 2:47 a.m. She has not been found. A beat of silence. Then, Ji-won's voice, from her earlier documentary, calm and instructional. If it happens to you, remember, it ends at 3:17. Hold on until 3:17. Don't try to force your way out. The blood you saw, that's from the ones who panicked. Stay calm. Wait. You will be released. The screen stayed black. In the darkness, a clock ticked. 2:52 a.m. 2:52 a.m. 2:52 a.m. Forever.